This is Journey to Chinese Fluency podcast, episode number 7.
Embarrassing moment, culture insights, proven methods to achieve Chinese fluency. Skip that learning curve with the Journey to Chinese Fluency podcast. Now, your host, Victor Yang.
Hello everyone, Victor Yang here and welcome to Journey to Chinese Fluency. Today I am joined by Anthony Roberts. Anthony, are you ready to share with us your journey to Chinese fluency?
Yes.
Awesome. Anthony is from Connecticut, USA. Anthony is in his late 30s. He speaks fluent English and Mandarin Chinese. Apart from that, he can also speak Thai at basic conversational level and bits and pieces in Cantonese and Teochew, which is 潮州话, which is basically another 2 dialects of Chinese. Anthony is married, now teaching martial arts, and just started doing some English-Mandarin interpreting. Hello, Anthony. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Victor. Thank you for having me.
So, Anthony, please share with us, why did you learn Chinese?
Around 1999, I started learning Wushu, Chinese martial arts. And I had actually, before that, I thought I would never even attempt to learn Mandarin because the tones sounded very intimidating. But after a couple years, I decided to give it a shot. And lucky for me, I was able to pick it up pretty quickly.
Cool. So what has been your biggest motivation? Was it because you started doing Wushu and then from there you found your interest in Chinese?
Right. Also at the time, through Wushu, my girlfriend was, and now wife, was Chinese.
Right.
I wasn't that disciplined when it came to study materials, but because I was practicing speaking every day, I would, fairly quickly got to a conversational level. So it was, just enjoying the ability to communicate in another language. That's pretty much how that happened.
Right. So did you learn Chinese because your wife is a Chinese, which gave you the motivation to learn? Or have you already started learning Chinese before you met her, but after meeting her, that gave you further motivation to learn?
It's kind of all mixed together. We were, I was learning Wushu and coming into contact with, we'd have teachers visiting from China. And I had, like anybody, taken languages in high school and in college, but never really, gotten to a point where I could actually even have a conversation in those languages. Whereas with Chinese, because I was very often around Chinese-speaking people, I had this motivation to learn more and also the opportunity to practice speaking every day. So they kind of fed on each other, this desire to be able to speak more with people who could not speak English or whose English wasn't that good, and also the reward of being able to actually communicate with these people. So that's how it kind of progressed over the years.
Right. So you had quite a number of Chinese friends around you.
Right. Yeah, that was really, for me, I was fortunate that I wasn't somewhere where I had a lot of study materials, but no opportunity to practice. I had many opportunities to practice every day, every week.
That's definitely very good. So please share with us your method of learning Chinese. What's been the most effective technique or method that's been working for you?
I think it's really changed over the years. When I was first learning, this was still the early days of the internet. So, we didn't have all these apps or online programs or websites that we have nowadays. In the beginning, what really started to help me to get a grasp on it was Pimsleur. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
At Pimsleur, I had a 25-minute commute somewhere. So they're half-hour lessons, so it was just right. And so, Pimsleur, nowadays I would say it's much too slow progressing. Like 30 minutes, you learn 3 words and you have to repeat the lesson over and over. But I think at the time it really helped because you would repeat after the speaker, and that really helped me to get the tones down pretty early on. So that's how I progressed in the beginning, was through Pimsleur and a little bit of other things. I had a dictionary, a couple dictionaries with me. Nowadays, it's very different. I'm still trying to improve. I pretty much divide up my, I'll try working on some grammar point every day, on some new vocabulary every day, listening to the news or some TV program, and reading some news too to try to round out my ability.
How did you memorize your vocabulary? Did you have a specific method?
Early on, it was just in the context of conversation. I would hear, this is 桌子, right? This is a table. And then I would use it and know it. I tried using things like spaced repetition software like Memrise, that website. But learning vocabulary without context has never worked for me. Nowadays, I'm trying to learn some more advanced vocabulary. So whenever I come across a word I don't know, I will include it in my SRS, spaced repetition software, Anki, in the whole sentence. So I'll choose 2 or 3 sentences that have that word, and that has been much more effective for me learning new vocabulary in that way, as opposed to just trying to remember a list of vocabulary.
That's a very interesting method to learn. So you basically get some sentences that contains the vocabulary you want to learn and practice those.
Yes.
Cool. I think that's a great method. So what's been your biggest challenge in learning Chinese, and how did you overcome it?
I'd say I still haven't overcome it, but the biggest challenge is the writing system. It's not so much like early on when I finally decided to try to be literate in Chinese as well as being able to speak it. I was you learn hundreds of characters, and I learned by writing them out. And that's just very time consuming. Nowadays, I can learn new characters quickly, but there's just so many. So,
Yep.
I can learn 10 a day, and that's what I'm doing right now is about 10 a day. But I'm still, 1,000 or 2 away from really rounding that out. Wow. So that's been the most challenging. It's not so much that it's difficult to learn new characters at this point. It's just that there's so many.
That's true. It's a never-ending task, I guess.
Yes.
But the good news is that you don't need to memorize the entire dictionary.
Right.
That would be a bit too much.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just a matter of persistency and just keep doing it rather than having a specific way to overcome the things.
I would say so. A lot, of course, you want to, like I was saying earlier, you want to have different strategies if you're a beginner or a more intermediate or advanced learner. But definitely it takes patience. You're not going to be, you're not going to be having conversations about politics or religion in 6 months. It's not like a Romance language where you can progress much faster. It will come, but it does take a long time.
So when you were learning all this, the vocabulary, the Chinese characters, I guess it can be easy to memorize, but it can be difficult to retain the information you have remembered, isn't it?
It depends. I found some words will stick the very first time, and of course being able to understand it, like when I hear it or read it, is different from being able to use it. I feel like my active vocabulary that I can use in a conversation is much smaller, and it's something I'm trying to work on. I think I may have drifted off topic there, but
right.
That for me, that's my challenge currently.
Right. So basically, for the characters and for the vocabularies, you don't use that often.
Yes.
How do you refresh that in your memory?
I try to be systematic, so I use the spaced repetition software, either individual characters, which isn't really a good idea for beginners, but for me, it's okay. Seeing them, reading a lot, listening a lot, in addition to the whatever program I'm using at the time. It helps to, like, once for me, I found out once you know about 1,500 characters, you can really figure out new characters fairly easily because there's only so many components. So if you see, the left side is yang, right, a sheep, and the radical is like 人字旁, right, the person radical. You can figure out it's probably pronounced yang, right? And then that helps if you want to look it up or if you have an idea of what it means, but you're not sure. So I really depend on that nowadays. Is kind of guessing sometimes when it's a new character.
There's probably some listeners that don't know what spaced repetition means. Maybe you can explain that to our listeners.
Oh yes, right. I think actually it's pretty common nowadays, but I think Pimsleur was the one who really made it popular. So spaced repetition, the idea is that you learn, suppose you learn a word or like a mathematical formula, and then a little while later, the software will remind you will give you some kind of notification, say, what does this mean? Or what is this formula? And then over time, it reminds you less and less often. The idea is that it becomes more and more deeply embedded in your long-term memory. So, I think memorize like after 4 hours, it reminds you to do it again. And then after 12 hours, less and less frequently, but always eventually it'll remind you again. So it kind of makes sure that you don't forget it completely.
I think the concept is once you remember something, it's in your short-term memory. And then after like a few hours, you probably forget. And then just before you forget, and you get reminded again.
Yes.
Which will bump up
right.
basically your memory again.
Yes.
And then this time you will stay in your brain for a longer time before you forget it again. So after a longer period of time, you get reminded again. And then eventually, if you get reminded like 7 or 10 times, that can potentially become your permanent memory. So that you won't forget it anymore.
Yes, that's a much better explanation.
Right. Okay. So did you when you talk to Chinese people, do you need to deal with any accent or any dialects?
I was actually just thinking about this earlier. Yes. My wife is from Guangdong, so she has her, she can't really do the, the tongue curling, the 卷舌头, sounds like of a 是, right? Mm-hmm. So that was actually a lot of the Mandarin I heard early on. So even though, the materials I used would be kind of a very general standard Mandarin, but the first time I was in Beijing and I was picked up by a taxi driver with he was still speaking standard Mandarin, but with a very strong Beijing accent.
That's right.
I had trouble understanding.
Yeah.
And it was a few years ago, I was watching some Taiwanese talk show. And of course, in Taiwan, they often have, I don't want to say it's poor Mandarin, but it's very, very different, right? And then you'll occasionally run by people who speak Mandarin but don't speak Putonghua. They don't speak standard Mandarin. Mm-hmm. So it's a dialect that's the tones are different. Some of the vocabulary is different. And at first I couldn't understand them at all. But it gets easier, as you go on.
Yep. So it's just a matter of hearing it a lot and eventually you'll get used to it.
Yes.
Now, share with us an embarrassing or a funny moment when you were learning Chinese.
Boy, too many to count, I think. Every once in a while, just the other day, I was speaking with someone, my sister-in-law, and I said someone had tried to contact me, but I'd already fallen asleep. I said I already 睡去了. 睡着, right, is to go to sleep.
Yep.
睡去 literally means to sleep, go, but of course it also I was informed that it's a tactful way of saying somebody has died.
Yep.
So I will never forget that. But after all these years, right? I've been speaking Chinese for many years, and I've probably said that a few times, and nobody had the heart to tell me that I said really? I'd already died. I'm guessing, right? I'm sure I've said that,
I see.
And nobody's corrected me. So about a week ago. So that's
a good joke.
I guess that's embarrassing.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's not that embarrassing. I would say that's more funny than embarrassing.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you share with us a success story, a most rewarding moment after you have become fluent in Chinese?
Well, there have been a lot of those. I haven't been to China in a few years, but I remember in 2000, I can't remember anymore. It was 2010 maybe. I was in a hotel. And we needed some kind of electronic plug or transformer, one of those that'll convert it from American to Chinese, the outlets. And somebody from the hotel came up and was speaking broken English with me.
Right. And
because I'm white, I look, I don't look Chinese. And I finally just said, 讲中文, you can speak Chinese. And the look of relief on his face was priceless.
Right.
So that's always very rewarding.
Yeah, definitely being able to use your Chinese to help someone, that's definitely a rewarding moment.
Right. Yeah. To speak with somebody who, you had that language barrier before and now you don't have that anymore. You can communicate either on a specific topic because their English is not at a very high level or just communicate at all because they can't speak English.
Just following on from that point, how would you compare your life before you have learned Chinese and your life after you have learned Chinese?
Oh, wow. I've been speaking Chinese now for almost half my life, so it's hard to say.
When did you learn Chinese?
I started 2001, I believe, really starting to learn it.
I see. Wow.
I let it stagnate for a long time, I was just speaking every day. And then a few years later, I decided I needed to really learn how to read it and write it rather than just communicate. And I think that's when things changed, is when you can read the news, for example, about some current event, and read what mainland Chinese have to say about it or what Taiwanese people have to say about it.
Right.
It gives you a bigger picture of the world, really. And of course, being able to speak Chinese, it gives you many more opportunities, certainly. So, as you said in the intro, I'm very interested in getting into interpretation. Medical interpretation is something I was doing recently. Yeah, so for doctors or psychologists, I was doing interpretation over the phone, which was a little tricky for some Chinese person who was in anger management therapy, which was, so I had to figure out how to say many, psychological terms that I'd never even heard in English, much less in Chinese. Yeah, so.
Are you translating both ways or just one way?
Yes. Both ways, which, it's a little tricky going from like Chinese to English. It's pretty effortless. Going from English to Chinese is harder.
Yep, I agree. Definitely in your case. So what would be one special thing about the Chinese culture that is different to your own culture?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. I don't know what it's like in China now or Taiwan, but I know that from my experience, I feel like Chinese culture is they have a very strong sense of identity of Chinese culture, right? There's they're very proud of what they've accomplished in history in terms of everything, and the fact that they are a continuous culture, from thousands of years ago. Everyone in China, even though I think there's the people in Guangdong and the people in the Northeast are, they have different cultures, but they all feel of themselves as a Chinese, and they have a very strong sense of their own history, and maybe a better answer would be family. I've noticed that Chinese place such a strong emphasis on family, and I guess that's what I was trying to get at is they respect for your 长辈, your elders, and
there's definitely an emphasis on the family and the society in the Chinese culture versus more of a individualistic culture in the Western world.
That's one thing that comes up over and over, with me.
So I guess this is individualism versus collectivism.
Yes, very. I mean, that's a cliche almost, but it's very, very true. I'm always surprised when speaking with Chinese people who are put in a difficult situation because of their family. And for me, even today, it's obvious to me that, of course, their own needs, are I wouldn't say more important, but are at least important. Whereas for them, of course, they are going to make sacrifices for their family that I don't think any American would make. In terms of money, in terms of their time, in terms of all sorts of things. It's a very, very strong emphasis, on family.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. So when you were living with your wife, did you find anything that you find it difficult to adjust to, especially to do with the culture difference?
I guess that would be the only thing, really.
Right.
We've been together for 15, 16 years.
Wow.
And no, not particularly, I would say. Other than that, sometimes you have like these issues of family. She has many brothers and sisters, and of course she has some of this Western individualism too from being in the U.S. for so many years.
Yeah, that's definitely good to have less difference between you two. So I guess the more different you are, the more conflict you may get. Yeah.
Well, I like Chinese food, and I like Chinese culture and everything. So, we get along very well. Guangdong, the Cantonese, the Teochew, they eat a lot of, green vegetables and soups and stuff. So it's all to my liking. So that's never an issue.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite city in China?
I don't know if it's call it a city, but, I've been to quite a few. I think the place I really enjoyed most in terms of, being willing to go back there is Wudang Mountain, Wudangshan.
Right. That's interesting. I can kind of guess why you chose that place.
Yeah, it's very clean, not much pollution.
Mm-hmm. And in a lot of Chinese kung fu movies,
right?
Yes. I have been watching since I was very young. I really enjoy kung fu movies, by the way. And, Wudangshan is a very important place. That's where people learn their kung fu. That's people, where they compete with each other and fight.
So, right. That's why we went there. Wudang. Yeah. I don't know any Wudang kung fu myself, but yes. Shanghai is very nice. It's Shanghai pollution isn't too bad.
But Wudang and Shanghai are definitely very different places.
Very different places. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Well, is there a tool, an app, or a website that you cannot live without when you were learning Chinese?
Wow. I think for me right now, even though it's definitely not for beginners, I'd say Memrise, MEMRISE. I guess beginners can use it to a degree, but I've been using that for, and Anki too, ANKI, spaced repetition software, learning new characters and, or having vocabulary in context. Those are really the most important to me right now, for sure.
All right. So if you are to recommend to our listeners only one book in learning Chinese or the Chinese culture, what would that be?
That's a tough question. I've been frustrated by, not frustrated, but I've been disappointed by a lot of the published materials, like college textbook materials, because the way they teach grammar or the sentences they teach are often very awkward or difficult to understand, or they just not, a Chinese speaker wouldn't speak that way. One textbook that I was introduced very early on by my then fiance's father was called Conversational Chinese 301, which is 汉语会话301句. It's 301 means 301句, which is 301 sentences. So the idea is that it introduces you to Chinese through sentence patterns. In other words, it kind of teaches you the grammar like sneakily, like you learn how to express yourself. You want to talk about this topic, you want to invite someone somewhere, you want to order something through these sentence forms, and then the vocab is kind of follows along. And for me, I found, like as I was saying earlier with me learning new vocab, is that learning vocab in isolation isn't effective. First off, you don't remember how to use it or exactly what the connotations are compared to the English equivalent word. This book, which I think I used the first edition, so that's from like the late 80s, but it looks like it's still in print. I think it's the third edition now.
Right.
I think it has a much better approach, which is teaching you naturalistic language, Chinese, and so you'll kind of get the right habits right away. And if I remember, the one I listened to, the audio had a very good speakers. They sound like they were from Beijing, which so unless you have objections to sounding like you're from Beijing, I think it's a good way to I think the audio is good too. Not sure about the current edition, but the old edition I really like that as well.
Cool. Sounds like a good book. So basically the idea is to build one sentence at a time, and then the grammar and the vocabulary are built into the sentence.
I think it's easier than reading these confusing grammatical explanations that I've noticed with other books where they use these, for me, that have never made any sense to me, right? If you see examples of how to use this grammatical form and how it's used and how it compares to the English, then you see, okay, this grammatical form is used in this way, as opposed to a description which doesn't really help you at all, right? Just uses very specific terminology that doesn't have anything to do with what you're actually saying. And of course, it's based on scenarios as well. So I remember one is a birthday party, right? And they teach you how to say cheers in Chinese and how to give a present in Chinese, right? And that's just applies to so many conversations, right? So I like that book a lot.
Thanks for the recommendation. So now, teach our audience your favorite Chinese quote or phrase or expression.
Well, one that I've heard a lot recently is 轻重缓急. I think it's a good one to introduce because it kind of has 轻重缓急 means when you are planning something or when you are doing something, to have a sense of the relative importance of things. So 轻 means light, 重 means heavy, 缓 means slow, and 急 means urgent, right? So it also has that nice structure of a lot of Chinese idioms where you have two things compared to each other. In this case, 轻重, right? That's heavy and light, and where in Chinese often means like what's less important, what's more important. And 缓急, 缓 meaning slow, right, what you can take your time with, and 急 meaning what's more urgent. So it's kind of telling you when you are attempting to accomplish anything or just do anything in life to have a sense of priorities.
Isn't that interesting that 轻重 talks about how important the thing is, and 缓急 talks about how urgent the thing is. Basically, these 4 characters covers all 4 aspects of things.
Yes.
So, Anthony, if you are to give our audience one single piece of advice in learning Chinese, what would that be?
For beginners especially, I'd actually have a couple things I would say. The very first thing is to make sure you have the tones right first. The Chinese sound system isn't too difficult, I think, for English speakers, but if the tones aren't correct, then Chinese speakers will have a difficult time understanding you.
Actually, I do hear a lot of people telling me that they find the Chinese tones and the pronunciation really, really difficult.
Yeah, for the tones, I'd say I've noticed people who either get them pretty quickly or people who really struggle with them. I was fortunate that I have the brain that I could get them quite quickly, but even then it was a matter of several months before I could produce them easily. For people who have more trouble, I think it's doable. I've seen English speakers who got it over time. You just have to be really diligent. I would say don't the specific sounds like getting specific English Chinese sounds like the curl tongue, sh, the 卷舌头, or the yu sound, right? Yu, that we don't have. Those are important, but if you flub those, it's not as bad as the getting the tones wrong. So I'd say I don't have specific advice except to really, really kind of relax and just let yourself copy what you hear. And it'll come over time. I think people have a lot of trouble with the third tone, the falling rising tone. They tend to change it into the second tone. I would say, but the full third tone you don't actually hear very often, right? It's usually just the half third. So I'd say, if you want to cheat a little bit, just learn the half third tone first.
Right.
Because I've only heard people from the Northeast who consistently say the full third tone, like at the end of a sentence.
Really?
Elsewhere, they really just say the half third tone. In my experience,
right?
Yeah.
Can you give us an example?
I watch these wushu teaching videos. They used to be VCDs, and then people ripped them and put them on YouTube. And there's one famous teacher who is from Beijing, so he'll say. Any sentence where he finishes with 很好, right? He'll say the whole third tone, right? But most elsewhere, unless they're exaggerating, they'll just say 很好, right? They won't say the full third tone, even at the end of a phrase. Of course, I speak with more Southern Chinese, so I'm sure that's even more common there.
So now, since you have mentioned this, I do realize that there is a difference between the full third tone and the third tone when people talk fast.
Right. And I've heard so many Chinese learners have trouble with saying the third tone separately from the second tone, that my advice would be just say the half third tone, I think they call it, until you really have a good feel for the rhythms of speech, and then you can try the full third tone.
I also hear that there are people who have already learned Chinese to a pretty advanced level, but still struggling with pronunciation. So what's your advice to those people? Would you say they should just don't worry about their pronunciation and just continue learning and eventually their pronunciation will adjust itself? Or would you say they should slow down and focus on their pronunciation first?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, I guess if your pronunciation is getting in the way of communication, if people are having trouble understanding you, yeah, I would say slow down, because, unless especially if you are speaking with Chinese people on a regular basis, if they're having trouble understanding you, then it can feel like wasted effort. I would say imagine that speaking, another language, the language you're learning is like singing. So you're just trying to copy the way you hear it, right? You're not worrying about adding your own personality to it yet. And so, because, being able to speak in a natural rhythm and tone of voice in a language you're learning is very, very difficult. So I would say, imagine you're copying a singer, right? That you're hearing some song on the radio. Another thing I'd say is, the speaking part of Chinese, even though we were talking about how difficult the tones are, I think it takes less time than learning how to write, right? Even for me, for someone who's been learning for so long, I'm still learning new characters every single day. And I think if a beginner were to go into that right away, thinking, well, I'm going to learn the writing system and then I'll spend like half and half, your progress will be very, very slow. And I think I'm not saying to not learn characters at all, even in the beginning, but I would say to put much more emphasis on learning what you're going to use the language for, which is hopefully to have conversations with people who speak Chinese. This gets back to the idiom, which is kind of why I chose it, 轻重缓急, right? What is more important in your right now, right? When you're starting out learning Chinese is the speaking, right? And what will give you much more immediate rewards, and that will be being able to speak. Even to read most of a newspaper article, you're going to need to know 2,000 characters or more, right? And if you decide, well, I'm going to put a lot of effort into learning 2,000 characters, 2,500 characters, that's going to take forever, and you're going to lose motivation, and you're going to give up on learning Chinese even before you've really gotten very far. So I'd say learning, I would say you can start learning some characters a little bit, but really for me, in terms of motivation, in terms of, what'll keep you going, focus on learning how to communicate first. I've always found interesting is almost all materials I've run across that teach Chinese, this will be my last thing, teach the phrase 你好吗? 你好, right, is the standard Chinese greeting, right? 你好. 你好吗? It literally means, are you good? Are you well? But I was just thinking of this the other day. I've never heard a Chinese person say that ever.
That's very true.
I don't know. The first few times people said it to me, who are learning Chinese, they know I speak Chinese. 你好吗? And I will tell them, well, actually, Chinese people don't really say that. And right. I've kind of given up because I figure it's not a big deal if they say 你好吗. But of course, it is not a phrase you ever hear in Chinese.
I think that's a great point you have brought out, because quite often as well, I do hear, some people learning Chinese that they say 你好吗 to me, and the first word that comes to my mind when I hear 你好吗 is the word foreigner. Native Chinese never say 你好吗 because that is the literal translation of how are you, all right, which is 你好吗.
Yeah.
But if you really hear how the native Chinese speak, they probably say, how are you going lately? Are you busy lately? Or things like that, right? Rather than saying,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Have you eaten yet? I would say it's quite a misleading thing, because I do see a lot of online courses or, even books. The first thing they teach you is how are you, which is 你好吗. And, that is such a waste of time, because you're learning something in English, right? You're translating English into Chinese.
Yeah.
So maybe the better way is to really understand how Chinese people talk. There are some certain phrases people talking in English that is phrased differently in Chinese, or maybe it's just never used.
Right. And that gets back to what I was saying earlier about conversation being really front and center. If you're going to learn, even Integrated Chinese, that's a popular textbook here in the U.S., or Practical Chinese Reader, they both of them teach lesson 1, 你好吗, right? And that's, as you said, it's unrealistic.
That's right.
So if you're going to learn how to have a conversation with somebody, you should understand, imagine if in English the lesson 1 was to learn how to say, to learn how do you do, right? In the U.S. anyway, that would be very strange, right?
Yeah, I learned that.
Maybe, yeah, you did learn that.
Yep, I did.
Oh, yeah, right. And maybe in the 1940s England, it was still, I can't say, right? But I have a feeling even in England, nobody says that.
I know, that is so bad. It's very misleading. It makes me worried when I see that type of learning material.
Mm-hmm. I haven't really seen much textbook style Chinese materials that I think are great, that I would really strongly recommend. That's why I talk about these apps and stuff that all have their flaws, but at least there are a lot of them, and you can sift the wheat from the chaff, so to speak.
Cool. So that's definitely some fantastic advice to our listeners. And you actually use the words you just shared, which is 轻重缓急. That is awesome. You have,
Right.
So to our listeners, make sure you have a priority instead of learning everything at the same time, learning how to read, how to write, how to listen. Don't do too much. Otherwise, you get burnt out at the beginning. It's better for you to delay learning Chinese characters because I think it's more important to be able to communicate, to talk to Chinese first before you need to write. I totally agree. That is definitely more important, at least at the beginning, right? So once you can start talking, you already feel a sense of achievement. And that's when I guess you can start learning, taking on some more difficult stuff like the Chinese characters.
Right.
How much time do you dedicate to learning Chinese every day?
Right now, I'm shooting for an hour a day. Recently, I've had a little more free time, so it's been about an hour and a half. It's a lot, it takes dedication. In the morning, I try to do everything in the morning. So I'll get up, I'll, do all the morning stuff. I'll maybe make breakfast. And then in these little time I have, I'll sit down and learn a few characters or, do some drills. And then when I'm walking around, I'll try to listen to a Chinese podcast. When you're making breakfast or when you're driving, you don't have to, you don't have to, all you have to do is listen and try to understand, right? So I've been listening to Chinese podcasts a lot recently.
So you have made learning Chinese as a part of your daily routine, I guess.
Yeah. For me, that's the only thing that worked. If you say, if you wait till you get, for me, right? I know other people are different. For me, I need to get it done early before the day has kind of overwhelmed me, right? With all the busyness. So I try to get through at least learning new material stuff very quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's part of your morning routine, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And of course, sometimes I can't do it. I'm too busy, right? Something comes up and I just don't beat myself up. I'll come back tomorrow.
What would you say to the people who maybe at the beginning dedicated like 1 hour a day to learning Chinese, but then because life gets busy and then eventually they just couldn't continue doing that much learning every day and then eventually they just get burned out? How would you advise them to get back on track?
Yeah, I would say start small, start realistic. For me to build up to an hour and a half a day, it's not like I just decided I was going to do it, right? Even for me, right? Even though I've been learning Chinese off and on for a long time, you definitely need to start at something that's a little challenging, but not so challenging that you'll be overwhelmed. So if you tell yourself, I'm going to spend 5 minutes on Chinese a day, right? That's so little that I don't think you'll see any progress at all, right? Maybe I would say if you're going to come back, start with something a little that really you have to set aside the time for. So that could be 15 minutes, right? Or half an hour. And then, maybe you'll find out, like for me, I look forward to spending my time learning Chinese, right? I'm at the point where I can read, the Chinese newspaper. I can watch, a Chinese news station. So I've gotten to the point where it's a little more rewarding. Earlier on, of course, it's going to be mostly just drilling and stuff like that. But even then, I think you can't devote too little time to it. I think you'll just, if it's only 5 minutes, then, you won't see any progress and you'll wonder why you spent that 5 minutes. So 15 to 30 minutes.
That's a good advice. Start realistic and start small and build on top of that. Make that into a habit. And eventually you don't have to force yourself all the time. You can just make that into a routine. Just automatically do that rather than, having all these psychological conflicts.
Yeah.
Just debating with yourself, should I do it or maybe not?
And some people, I think, like to do it in the evening, for example. Everything's over, I can relax and sit down. So I'd say experiment too. Try what works for you and don't get discouraged, I think. In the beginning, you're going to find you go through stretches where you feel like you haven't accomplished anything. I think as long as you find out what motivates you to keep learning, then you should be okay.
Some really great advice there. So just before we let you go, Anthony, how can our listeners reach you?
Well, I don't have my own website at the moment, but you can, if you look at Malee School, that's MALEE school.com. That's the Wushu school I teach at. And if you look under our instructors, there's just a little short bio of me there. And if I do ever do anything more, I'll probably link to it from there.
Sure, I'll put that in the show notes. Anthony, thank you so much today for sharing with our listeners your journey in learning Chinese. You have given us so much great advice to take away, and we wish you a fabulous journey ahead.
And thank you, Victor.
To our listeners, the show note is now available at ChineseTalkEase.com/7. TalkEase is spelled as TALKEZE. Do you want to learn Chinese for free? Start your own journey to Chinese fluency with my video lessons at ChineseTalkEase.com. TalkEase is spelled as TALKEZE. Also remember to join our Facebook group. Just head over to TalkChineseCommunity.com. If you have enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on iTunes. Each month, I will choose one reviewer and give out a 1-year subscription to all my premium video lessons for free. That's it for now. I'll see you in the next episode.